1, 2, 3, 4. I got thoughts running through my head. I got thoughts, can't you see? I got thoughts, the books I read. I got thoughts, won't you listen to me?
So one of the things that I wanted to point out about the No Circuit as compared to Under the Immoral Bridge. In Under the Immoral Bridge, I took kind of great pains to make sure that the whole thing was written from Bridge's viewpoint. You only saw him and his thoughts and all that. And it became clear really early on that wasn't going to work for this one completely. Now, most of the novel would still be, and most of the Bridge novels are still third-person type following either Bridge or some other character, but this was the first time where I actually broke out of that mold, or broke out of that mold and did the interludes. And I call them interludes as kind of a very obvious switch in viewpoint. The first one being when the CNN chopper, or I think it's Chronosoft News Network, Chrono News Network, CNN, different CNN, was reporting on the dome surrounding Boulder and the whole appearance of the fire dragon and all that kind of stuff. I knew that I was going to need to, break out of Bridges' viewpoint. Now, I could have shown him watching it, and I set it up by showing him watching it, but I felt like it would work better as almost like a television script of, this happened here, this person said this person said that. So, as a transcript. And then later on in the book, when the technomancers are telling their story and explaining what happened in Boulder, again, I needed to break that out, and I went more for an omniscient third-person perspective where we had everybody, but it was mostly Balfour. In Chapter 2 and Chapter 3, Bridge talks a little bit about what he saw when the Technomancer wave swam over everybody, and where basically he felt like he had jacked in but was not jacked in fully, so everything on the global net around him was ghost-like, but he could also still see real life, and people on the global net, Angela in particular, tells him, I could see ghost impressions of real things, and then also, overlaid onto what I was seeing in the net. One of the things I don't think I've talked about in the earlier videos is that Angela and Bridge in the past had worked together, not just as hackers, but also to create their own fantasy world. Basically, MMOGs, massively multiplayer online games. If you've ever played World of Warcraft, which is the one everybody knows, but go back to EverQuest and Dark Age of Camelot and those kind of, old school Shadowbane kind of games. My thought process was that rather than basically peter out like they have done after World of Warcraft basically took over the whole thing, MMOGs would transform from these big AAA publisher live services to, in some ways, what has happened is you get these little boutique worlds that are created by the people that play them. That whoever runs that server is has built this whole world based off using building blocks of some other software, and so they're creating Ars Perthnia over here, and there's another one over here, and it's, just millions of them, because my thought at the time was that would be the big thing. And in some ways, I'm not totally wrong on that. They aren't as big as I expected with MMOGs. But if you look at games, and I'm going to go full nerd here with video games, if you look at games on Steam like Conan Exiles, Rust, DayZ, you have online games, and they're not as massive as I was thinking they would be. Like, they don't have thousands of users. They may have hundreds. But they are little, very boutique servers based around a particular game engine, like, say, Conan Exiles. You could build, your own world that's kind of the vanilla world, but then you can also add mods into it so that it becomes a different experience. So I think we're kind of headed towards where I was talking about game-wise with MMOGs and online experiences. but we're obviously not there yet. And of course, it's still based off somebody, some larger publisher selling you a package. Although the Steam Early Access and things like Rust and stuff like that are more mod based, so you don't necessarily, there's more indie developers doing it. Subnautica, I believe, is a perfect example of one of those kind of indie developers that really they aren't connected to a big publisher, but they somehow eke out a living, making this mod. Setup for why Bridge ends up going to Boulder is twofold. Once you get to the end of the book, you kind of recognize it, but in the beginning, it's something else. Boulder gets trapped into this dome, and basically everyone with an interface jack from Boulder outward to past Los Angeles, anybody with an interface jack gets struck by this seizure, and they start to feel this compulsion to go to Boulder, and they say Boulder, they scream out Boulder, and Bridge doesn't know what that means, but he looks at the news coverage and sees that Boulder's happening, and he says, "Oh, this can't be a coincidence," but I ain't going anywhere near that, because he realizes that not only would whatever's left of the federal government and military or whatever be investigating this as a potential terrorist act, the corporate police in and around the area would also be investigating it. Not to mention any of the corporations that have any kind of energy concerns, defense contracts, any of that sort of stuff, would want to find out what this is, because it's clearly, there would clearly be applications for energy that creates this dome, or using this dome technology, whatever it is, to protect cities and that sort of thing. So he knows this place is going to be crawling with spooks of all types, cops and everything. It's like that's the last place Bridge would want to show up. However, he turns to his bodyguard and friend Aristotle, and Aristotle's freaking the hell out. And he's never really seen Aristotle freaked out. Aristotle's always just been calm, collected, just a straight line. And Aristotle's about ready to just go, tearing off to Boulder. He's like, why? Because Aristotle's grandmother, who mostly raised him, lives in Boulder. She's a very bohemian type of person, lives near the university. I think she taught, I don't remember if I said it, but I think my idea was that she either taught art at the college or was just an artist in Boulder. And from what my reading said on the city itself, Boulder has a decent art community, so that would be a perfect place for that type of person. Aristotle pretty much threatens Bridge with, you owe me for getting arrested in the last novel. You owe me for that, so we're going to go do this. Bridge reluctantly agrees, but he knows that he's got to have more than just Aristotle backing him up, because Aristotle's probably not, his mind's not going to fully be in the game, so he knows he needs somebody else there. So he calls his buddy Stonewall, who is having his own trouble because of all the people falling down screaming Boulder around him. Bridge calls up Stonewall and says, can you come with me for this? And because Bridge can tie the people that are having seizures to Boulder, he convinces Stonewall to come along. And one of the reasons I wanted to bring Stonewall into this is because, number one, I like the character, but I just kind of wanted to have a little moment like I had in chapter 5, where Aristotle and Stonewall are having one of their kind of highbrow political, philosophical discussions, because I wanted just to have that discussion. So it's funny how as I get later on in the book, one of the things I can see is that Stonewall, and for the most part, honestly, Aristotle, are just kind of window dressing for most of the book. You get a little bit of characterization with him, and Aristotle not quite so much because of his stake in rescuing his grandmother. We hear a little bit more about Aristotle, so there's some character development with him. But with Stonewall, it kind of ends up being there, and I in some instances I regret that, because I really like Stonewall as a character. I really, really dig that character and want to give him stuff to do. But he didn't really have a lot to do this episode. He basically had one or two conversations, and he did have, the connection with the naturalist. But other than that, he was just kind of there. Sure, but that means those with more ability are supporting those with more need. That's not equitable. That's state-sponsored slavery to the weak. And for that matter, who gets to decide the measure of the distribution? That's where the problem lies. The apparatus that distributes the state assets is just another flawed oligarchic institution. It is entirely too vulnerable to corruption because, just like unchecked capitalism, it puts all the power into the hands of the few. You are trading exploitation by the bourgeoisie for exploitation by the proletariat. Stonewall vehemently disagreed. Not if you have the proper democratic process, either through one-to-one representation by the technologically enabled proletariat or proper, transparent representative democracy by the academic elite. Bridge let out a loud guffaw from the back seat. Stonewall glanced back over his shoulder with a smirk. Welcome back to the living, Bridge. You got something to add to the discussion? You're both nuts. It's very illuminating, Bridge, Aristotle quipped. I'd like to subscribe to your newsletter. Bridge shifted in the seat and laughed. You're both missing the fundamental problem with all that shit. You can talk around the issue with flowery language and academic labels, but it all falls apart the minute you put it to practice. Human beings are fucked up creatures. Too much is never enough. Put a man in charge of feeding the poor, and he will be eating caviar while doling out government cheese covered in rat droppings. Give him $10 profit by employing American adults, and he'll drop them on Skid Row the minute he can get some 3-year-old in Botswana to make the same product for 10 cents. He can't help it. We may have mapped the DNA of humans, but we missed the most important gene of all, the asshole gene. Everybody's got it, every race, every sex, every creed, every country. We're all just gigantic assholes in waiting. So what's your solution then, Mr. Cynical? You know my system, boys, Bridge said, settling back in the seat for another nap. Fuck him first before he fucks you. Carr was silent for a moment. Finally, Stonewall broke the tension by saying, and this is why I always keep Bridge to my front. All three erupted in laughter as the car zoomed down the interstate. So that's kind of the tail end of the conversation that I wanted to have between Stonewall and Aristotle. And it sort of encapsulates some of my thinking, politically speaking, on just political systems in general. Stonewall, as you can tell, is a little bit more on the socialist side, probably closer to me than Aristotle. Aristotle still has that has capitalism in mind as a system. So I just wanted to have those two discussing it. But then, because of that, I wanted Bridge to come out and be the cynical asshole that he is. Because Bridge is not... A lot of authors will, make their main character kind of their Mary Sue version of themselves. I don't think of Bridge as myself, but I do let myself talk through him at times. This being one of those times where the cynical side of me that says, that says basically everybody's an asshole and they will screw you if you give them a chance. Now, obviously, I don't believe like Bridge. Bridge is one of those guys, and I'm pretty sure I've said it in one of the novels. As far as government systems go, he doesn't give a shit what it is. As a matter of fact, the more authoritarian, the more restrictive the system, the better Bridge makes out. He always says, when you deprive someone of something, when you make something illegal so that they can't have it, but don't change the fact that they still want it. I mean, saying they can't have it doesn't change the need that they have to have it, that unspeakable need. So the more restrictive a society is, the better he does, because more people come looking for him. Whereas with a more open, permissive society, he is not going to do as well because they don't need it. Their things are available. I mean, there would still be things that are not available that he would be able to offer, but there wouldn't be as many things. So, under a Mike Pence type administration, Bridge would be cleaning up because he would, restrict gay people and immigrants and all this stuff, and Bridge would be like, okay, well, I can provide that for you. He says you can't have it, but I know you want it, so let's have it. Let me stop.